After two visits to Europe in 2026, California Governor Gavin Newsom turns his attention to America and a book tour promoting his new memoir, Young Man in a Hurry. But what about conditions in the Golden State? Meanwhile, there's little angelic about the City of Angels. Los Angeles mayor's race experiencing a major plot twist and calls for the head of LA's Summer Olympics to resign after he's tied to the Jeffrey Epstein scandal. We'll discuss all of this and more on a California edition of Matters of Policy and Politics.
It's Thursday, February 19th, 2026, and you're listening to Matters of Policy and Politics, a podcast devoted to the discussion of policy research from the Hoover Institution and issues of geopolitical, national, and local concern. I'm Jonathan Mavridis, and every month I have the privilege of moderating a discussion on politics and the economic situation of the Golden State with two Hoover Fellows and experts on these issues, Bill Whalen and Lee Ohanian. Bill Whalen is the Virginia Hobbs Carpenter Distinguished Policy Fellow in Journalism and the regular host of the show, and Lee Ohanian is a Hoover Senior Fellow and Professor of Economics at the University of California, Los Angeles. Both write for Hoover's web channel, California on Your Mind. Good day, gentlemen. How are you doing?
Very well, very well.
Hey, fellas. Yeah, and just trying to dry out.
So we have a traveling governor. California Governor Gavin Newsom shuttles between the Munich Security Conference and an early state bookstore, pitching California's climate leadership abroad while facing refinery closures, rising oil imports, and high-speed rails mounting costs at home. Question for Lee, what does it tell us about Newsonomics? And I generally want to ask you about, is there consistency between his oppositions to wealth taxes in California, but leaving the door open for something akin to the federal level?
Yeah, Jonathan, I think most people would look at the governor as being progressive. He criticizes the president every chance he gets, which I think has been a winning political strategy for him. In terms of, his own economic record and the issue regarding wealth taxes, he states he's opposed to wealth taxes. I think it probably has been too little too late because the idea should have been squashed last summer. What's happened is that we've had several billionaires who the tax would apply to have moved out of state or are in the process of establishing residence in another state. For example, Peter Thiel, who co-founded PayPal, I believe, is looking to establish residence in Florida, and he left before the end of calendar year 2025. So I think Bernie Sanders is coming out to California. Perhaps he's already been here. And he, of course, is all in on wealth taxes. So I think that could be a conflicting issue for Newsom within the Democratic Party that just goes further and further left every day. When you look at the governor's economic record, and if we particularly look at his second term, in terms of job creation, the Legislative Analyst's Office, which is a nonpartisan advisory group that provides input to fiscal policy to Sacramento, wrote about a loss of over 100,000 private sector jobs between late 2022 and early to mid 2024. The California Center for Jobs has been recording additional private sector job losses, which, so this is terrible. Electricity prices in the state are among the highest in the country. Gasoline prices, I believe, are the highest, even higher than Hawaii, if you can believe that. Homelessness has gone up under the governor's watch, despite spending $24+ billion. Housing construction remains very, very depressed, and that was the governor's signature platform when he first ran for office in 2018. So it's not a good economic record that he's going to run on, and we'll see how he tries to play that.
Yeah, he obviously, this is a challenge if he's going to run for the presidency. Bernie Sanders did come to California. He did support the proposed 5% tax on billionaires that may or may not appear on the November ballot out here. Newsom went to the Munich Security Conference, as Jonathan mentioned. Who else was there? Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, AOC, who is maybe the heir apparent to the Bernie wing of the party. She's all in on wealth taxes too. And the governor might end up doing some sort of modified hangout where he says, I oppose this at the state level, but the door is open for doing it at the federal level. Maybe that's how he tries to get out of it that way. But I think, to his credit, he understands that if you put forward this billionaire tax, it's not like billionaires are all Scrooge McDuck and they sleep on beds of money and walk around with, 5% of the wealth in their pocket and hand it over to you, it gets very complicated, Lee, in terms of how exactly to cough up the money. Do you have to sell off, part of your company? Do you have to sell off your assets? Keep in mind, if you sell off assets, stock shares, you get double taxed because you not only paying the 5% billionaires tax, but you're also paying tax on selling your capital gains, for example. So you get hit that way. But it's the complicated story of selling the California economy. It's very interesting. Newsom put out a set of talking points last night. I'm on the the email blast list for him, so I always follow the stuff. And buried in the middle of the talking points, Lee, he claims that California pay less. I think middle class Californians, he qualifies it now, or working class Californians pay less than people in red states do in taxes. So that's going to be his mantra moving forward, especially as he now moves into selling his book and is going to be going around the country to doing this. But it's just, I think it's overall it's a very difficult perception to him to fight, especially when we get to the idea of gasoline prices. I just can tell you anecdotally, when I have family and friends to come visit in California, one of the first things they take notice of as we drive down the street is they see the price of gasoline. And whereas they come from a state where there's a 3 or a 2 to the left of the price, in California there is a 4 or oftentimes a 5. I filled up the other day, it was 5.25 a gallon, for example. So people's eyes see that and they bug out.
Yeah, Bill, it's interesting. He's made this claim about California being a lower tax state than places like Texas or perhaps Florida. And I just don't know, I don't know how this calculation is being made, because the Tax Foundation, which is the standard source for taxes across the country, it's been around, I think, for probably about 100 years, is highly respected. It ranks California as 48th, or third highest in taxes. The California Policy Center has estimated that in 2024, state and local tax revenue collected was over $800 billion. I believe about $828 billion. And if you divide that by the number of households in California, you come up with over $50,000 per household. So another way of thinking about that is that you could almost have a full-time government worker at your service every single day. So I just don't know where this tax claim, I just don't see it.
Here's the exact claim, Lee. I'm looking at the email right now. Middle class family, he wrote, middle class families in California pay less, that's less in the very Trumpian all caps, pay less in taxes than in states like Texas, Oklahoma, and Arkansas.
Yeah, so Texas doesn't have a personal income tax. And I am pretty sure that in Texas, state and local tax revenue collection is not $54,000 per household. So I think there's some think tank that he gets this from, and I don't know how they do it. I think what they're doing is conflating tax policies, which are tax rates, with economic outcomes. And I don't know what they mean by a middle class family in California or a middle class family in Texas. But in any case, I don't think anyone's really going to buy California being a low tax state. Bill, when you talk about gas prices, we're looking at some refinery closures, including a Valero refinery up in Benicia. And we've lost just an enormous amount of refining capacity over the years. And when people ask me about economic stories, I say, to understand this stuff, just put yourself in the position of the organization making the choice. And I say, why would someone want to continue to refine gasoline in California when California is not a gasoline friendly state under the current administration? Valero paid, I believe, an $84 billion penalty a couple of years ago because of emissions from that plant. There's all sorts of regulatory and compliance problems within California. You're just not making money if you're in the gasoline refinery business. If we, for example, I did a calculation based on the idea that if we lose 10% of our gasoline supply, and I think that Valero plant is around 9 or 10% of the state's total, then because gasoline is a very price insensitive product, you know, that $4.50 average gasoline price in California could rise a dollar in the next few months to $5.50. Currently, it's about 50% higher than the national average. So, Bill, you said people come visit me and they look at a California gas price and they're used to seeing a two or a three as the first digit. I don't see how that's not going to continue to rise for California. And of course, energy prices are an incredible burden on lower income households within the state.
Yeah, you probably saw the story, Lee, about California having to import oil from the Bahamas now. You have a problem here. Valero shuts down. That's about 145,000 barrels of oil a day that they refine. So you have to find 145,000 barrels to refine elsewhere. And you look around the country, and guess what? Other states do not do the California blend. So, you know, who's going to step up and fill a void here? I don't know. So now we get into market economics and supply and demand. Demand exists, supply goes down, price goes up. Very simple. And that's a headache for the governor because, again, it's one of the first things that people notice when they get here, and it eats away at your budget. You might remember a state lawmaker being recalled a few years back because why? He voted for an increase in the gasoline tax. So this is something that really irritates Californians. You know, for all the talk about electric vehicles and green energy, we are still a car society. I hate to tell you. So this is something the governor's going to have to deal with if and when he comes back from the book tour.
Yeah, and we're very much a gasoline vehicle driven state, and there's no getting around that. And there's no getting around that 5 years from now, and I don't think there's any getting around that 10 years from now. And you know, previously we imported gasoline from New Brunswick, Canada, and from South Korea. And you can just imagine that, you know, the lengths of those trips that are going to increase the price of gas. So maybe it's good that we found a new supplier in the Bahamas. But we've dug ourselves into a corner because we have very low carbon content gasoline that other states do not use. So it's a real, you know, so we're very vulnerable. You know, we're risking our economy on the ability to purchase our special blended gasoline from foreign countries. And if something happens to those countries, then we're really going to be in trouble because we simply don't have the refining capacity.
Yeah, I saw a rather staggering number the other day. In 1982, this is the last year of Jerry Brown's first run as governor, California imported about 6% of its oil needs. In 2024, California imported about 64% of its oil needs.
Yeah, so think about that. So almost two-thirds of our gas is imported. And this becomes, I mean, what I'm going to say is, of course, very low probability, but this is a national security risk for California. We're just highly dependent on these foreign sources. They're all, of course, friendly to us, but you just don't know what's going to happen down the road. And the Sacramento has put us in a real bind here. This was a mistake. And California, you know, we're all in on green energy. We're all in on climate change. But the way to deal with that is not by creating more carbon emissions by bringing gasoline from thousands of miles away. So this one's a real head scratcher, Bill, and it's one that people feel very, very directly. And as you noted, they hold gas prices is something they hold politicians accountable for.
It is. You know, you have to understand the California lifestyle in part to understand this problem. We are a very large state. For example, I have a niece and a couple of her sons are coming with her in a couple of weeks. They're going to hang out with me for a week here in California. I want to drive them around the state. Well, I don't own an EV, and if I did, I'd have a problem. If I wanted to drive from the Bay Area down to Los Angeles, it's about 350 miles. I'm not going to get there in one fell swoop on one charge of my battery. I'm not going to sit around at a charging station for a couple of hours while my car's charging those little munchkins. I need a gasoline car, plain and simple. I need an SUV to get around with them. So that's in part the state's design. But also, Lee and Jonathan, we don't have a good public transportation system. We don't have a high-speed rail system to move people around the state. And I think maybe we should talk a little bit about HSR for a moment. I have a piece in the California Post, the New York Post new version out here this week. And what I pointed out was that there's a pattern to what Governor Newsom does. He goes overseas and then he comes back to California and perhaps makes up for lost time by doing a big splash event to show that he is on top of things and things are going well in California. And when he came back from the Munich Security Conference, he went down to the Central Valley to do an event, Lee, on high-speed rail. I think what they were doing was celebrating the open of a construction facility, but Newsom was hailing this as progress. But I look at high-speed rail, Lee, and I see the future problematic at best. They still don't have anybody on the train. They still haven't laid down tracks. There's many people riding the train now as were riding the train 5 years ago. Supposedly, the so-called train to nowhere in the Central Valley is going to open up later this decade, perhaps some point in the early 2030s, maybe the Los Angeles-San Francisco line in the late 2030s. To be perfectly morbid about this, Gavin Newsom was born in 1967. If he lives to be 85 years old, that would be, what, 2052? I'm not sure if we're going to have a high-speed rail line around by then either. So, Lee, what is the future for high-speed rail? Because the one thing that stands out to me is the price keeps going up. They need about $100 billion the last I looked. Where's that money going to come from?
Yeah, Bill, where is that money going to come from? I don't know. I don't know where that money is going to come from. One of the major mistakes that was made with high-speed rail is that, and this is really a kick in the pants to the voters who voted a $10 billion bond way back in 2008. The idea was the state knew what it was doing, and that federal money would be coming and private investors would be flocking. And there is an implicit suggestion that hey, if you pony up $10 billion, we're good to go with the rest, and we're going to have these amazing space age trains that are going to be going from LA to San Francisco in 2 hours and 40 minutes. What we have now is perhaps as much as $35 billion for Bakersfield and Merced that may not be open until 2035.
Right.
And Bill, can you imagine going to voters back in 2008 and say, hey, how about we spend $35 billion on a trade from Bakersfield and Merced that'll be ready 27 years later? It's comical.
I think the original pitch, Lee, was to have the whole thing built by 2020, wasn't it?
Yeah, the whole thing. Well, yeah, certainly LA to SF was supposed to be built by 2020.
Yeah.
And that was supposed to be in the neighborhood of 33 billion. So I mean, it's comical to think anybody would have ever thought building Bakersfield and Merced for $35 billion was a good idea. That's just silly.
Right.
And the proposition that we collectively, California's funded, requires no operating subsidies. I don't think there's anyone, including the High-Speed Rail Commission, that believes Bakersfield and Merced can exist without subsidies in the absence of the rest of the system being built. So that's going to be a legal problem. I think the state is just sidestepping that right now. And the way they're sidestepping it is by saying, well, you know what, we can also go from, they can also, we're also planning a route to Gilroy. And again, it's just like, these are not priority investments. The governor, in my opinion, the governor made just an enormous strategic mistake in 2019. He was giving his inaugural address. He had just been elected with over 60% of the vote. He was never riding as high as he was during that inauguration. And he said, we don't have the money. We've made a lot of mistakes on high-speed rail. And then he said, we've got to freeze this until we have a stable revenue source and until we can kind of figure out and resolve all the mistakes we've made. That's what he should have said. But instead he said, oh, we can go from Bakersfield to Merced.
Right. So the latest is he's now touting the Bakersfield to Merced. He's talking about jobs tied to the project. High-speed rail is now advertising it as a great way to get to Yosemite. Never mind the fact that I think the closest station will be about 70 miles from Yosemite. So that's quite a hike. I think we would agree. But, the funding is interesting, Lee. So, you mentioned the original down payment on this. This was a bond passed in 2008, I believe. And it was what,
Yep.
about $10 billion bond, I believe, so about a quarter of the
Yep.
project. But Lee, they went with a bond and not a tax. And I suppose because in part taxes are harder to sell. But Lee, if they had gone with maybe a 1% increase in the sales tax, and again, I'm not saying it would have passed, but if they had tried that, they would have a dedicated fund of money each year right now to put into high-speed rail instead of just getting basically a loan from the bank every few years in the form of a bond or trying to hope that Washington showers money your way, which it did during the Biden years, but they got pulled back during the Trump years. So this is always a cautionary tale for California. Why are we doing the billionaires tax out here? The backers of the initiative say it's because of cuts in federal health programs. Well, again, that's tide goes in, tide goes out. Money comes in during the Biden years, money goes out in the Trump years. The budget itself rests on all sorts of money we got from COVID and so forth. We end up able to keep up with spending. So I look at high-speed rail as yet another cautionary tale of California spending and California investment where you don't really have a financial plan at foot, but you still go ahead with the great idea nonetheless.
Yeah, and this, I mean, just another data point on why this should have been halted. The state just agreed to pay over a $500 million change order penalty to a contractor.
Yeah.
And what's really, what's ironic about that is that, every annual report that comes out from high speed rail says we're past the speed bumps. We know what we're doing now. And then you come across, here it is in 2026, and and we're paying over $500 million in change orders to a contractor. So no, they don't know what they're doing. I mean, certainly you can't sell it to anyone as we know what we're doing. So, cap and trade money is going to be used. Newsom, I think, extended cap and trade, I think, for 20 years, but that's not going to be enough. We're looking at a total system cost of perhaps as high as $135 billion, which I believe is perhaps way too low because every time we've seen a cost estimate, it's been way too low. So this is just, so Bill, when you ask me what's going on high speed rail, I mean, no, California to San Francisco, I just don't see how that's ever going to get done, particularly in a budget where, we've got we've got ongoing budget deficits every single year now. And the governor's, I mean, there's another thing Newsom's going to have to deal with in terms of a presidential campaign. I believe Jerry Brown's last budget was $202 billion. And I believe the governor's proposed budget, we'll see what comes in June and July, but the governor's proposed budget is $348 billion.
Right.
So that comes in about a 72% increase. Simply not sustainable. That's, there's simply no economics that can justify that. Particularly when you look at California and you ask yourself, well, just what? How much better is government? How much infrastructure do we have since that time? Electricity prices, have they gone down? Gas prices, have they gone down? Natural gas prices, have they gone down? Water, has that gotten better? So you've got this enormous spending spree, and I think most people are going to look around and say, nope, I just don't see it. So that's another issue the governor's going to have to confront.
That budget continues, Lee, as long as the AI boom continues in the market, because that's what's fueling it right now. AI stocks go wild, capital gains money pours into Sacramento. Lawmakers can turn that into spending projects if they so choose, which they do, rather than say cut taxes or give the money back to taxpayers. But this ties back into our talk about the billionaires tax. What if AI billionaires just start saying enough with California and start leaving the state, and future AI billionaires do the same? Now, in fair, not all AI billionaires are in this camp. Justin Wong, for example, the CEO of NVIDIA, he has no problem with the billionaire tax. He's willing to cough up 5%. But a lot of other people in the industries are not. And so, again, this gets back to the idea of you're killing the goose that lays the golden egg, and it's just going to cause problems down the road, not just finding future gooses to lay golden eggs, but also, Lee, if you look at this initiative, it's the 5% goes into California healthcare programs, state health programs. That's ongoing spending. So what happens at the end of 5 years when you stop taking money away from the billionaires? You have to probably extend the tax another 5 years and another 5 years beyond that, as we saw with Propositions 30 and 55 in the past couple of decades when we, raised the taxes on the upper end earners for only 4 years at the first go to help with the temporary tax increase to help with the budget, but then they extended that for another 12 years. That comes up in 2030, I believe, Lee. It'll, mark my words, it'll get extended at least another 12 years.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, when's the last time a California tax on highly productive people got rescinded, or just dried up and blew away? And
Well,
you know,
I can tell you the last time we cut taxes because I wrote the script for the governor when he did it, about 1998.
okay, 28 years ago. Uh, well, another issue I think the Sacramento's maybe not fully comprehending is that AI, certainly the large language models requires just enormous amounts of electricity,
Yes, yes.
and we have a huge electrical grid problem. And I think really the only way around that, at least in California, is for small modular nuclear reactors to be associated with these data centers. So good luck in California trying to get that through. So what we're risking is losing AI data centers to states that have much more reliable electricity grids. I mean, Texas, the governor loves to criticize Texas. A lot of data centers are opening in Texas, which has a lot of electricity.
Yeah, Lee, the future of AI in California could be that of like Apple. If you buy an Apple product, like you buy a laptop, you look on the box, what does it say? Designed in California. Doesn't say built in California, manufactured in California, designed in California. Somewhere in tiny print, there's, built in China, manufactured in China on it. But, Apple doesn't build its products in California. Why? The labor would be expensive, ridiculous. You couldn't get your laptop for $1,200. Lord knows how much it would cost. But you look at other states right now that are building, and Virginia is where the one to look at, Lee, right now, where Glenn Youngkin, the former governor, was very aggressive in bringing AI into the state. And now the state has a problem. It doesn't have enough energy for AI. It's going to invest now in more offshore and wind energy, apparently, which is not reliable. And there's going to be a reckoning for AI. But again, getting back to California, I don't see where the revenue is going to come if AI dries up all of a sudden.
We're just walking a tightrope. The
Yeah.
idea that we could, just 72% increase in the budget over a 6 year, over a seven-year period is, that's just fiscally irresponsible. You look at states that are growing, such as Texas and Florida, and they haven't increased their budgets like that. We're very profligate in terms of our spending, and the LAO has warned Sacramento about the budgets that are in place. The LAO's predictions for future revenues are significantly less rosy than what's coming out of than the governor's finance office. Revenues are coming in faster than had been anticipated, but California's had this revenue roller coaster issue for a long time. When stock prices are going up, and when there are IPOs, cash flows into Sacramento, and when the stock market goes down and there's not IPOs, then we have a revenue crash. And I just don't know what we're going to do the next time that happens, because we just don't really have much of a buffer anymore. And Bill, you look at stuff like the cost of state government. There's a fellow named Ed Ring. He's a great economic analyst at the California Policy Center. He calculated average state salaries, including non-wage compensation.
Right.
The last time he did that was back and it was using 2019 data. And he found that the average state worker was making $143,000 in salary and benefits. Now, this is underestimated because pensions are not fully funded.
Mm-hmm.
Now, if you just scale that 143,000 up by the rate of inflation that's existed between 2019 and today, using the CPI, that's about 27%. That means the average state worker is taking home a pay package, including benefits, of $190,000. That's extraordinarily high. So there's just a lot of stuff that Sacramento is really letting Californians down on. And again, this is if the governor chooses to run for president, and I don't see any doubt that he is. This is cannon fodder for his opponents to come after him, including Democrats. They're going to say, "Hey, I ran a blue state. I was able to balance the budget. My costs didn't go my costs didn't go crazy. I didn't have a high-speed rail that is still not anywhere close to being finished. It's like, what does he say in response to that?
Although Democratic rivals will probably tread lightly on the pension issue, Lee, because you're rattling the cage of unions. And you saw that out here in San Francisco last week, where the big story was the local school district public teachers went on strike for a week. They wanted more money. David Crane, who is a Stanford lecturer, he also runs an organization called Govern for California, which does great digging into state government. He was an advisor to Arnold Schwarzenegger, so he knows this stuff inside and out. David pointed out that if you look at the last 20 years of spending in San Francisco public schools, the revenue side has doubled. Meanwhile, Lee, the pension side, it's quintupled. It's gone up 5 times in terms of what they're now obligated in pensions. Similar story at the state level. I don't have the numbers in front of me here right now, but the pension debt grows there as well. Jerry Brown tried to go after pension reform. He did a little bit as a governor, didn't get very far though, and kind of stepped away from it, realizing that he would just get caught like Winnie the Pooh with his head in the bowl stuck in the jar. But Newsom really hasn't addressed this, and again, this falls under the category of stuff his successor is going to inherit. What to do about the mountain of debt in California? I had a conversation with our colleague Josh Rao, who's written a lot about this. Josh is great on California stuff as well, and you just don't really have too many good solutions here other than negotiating, giving people a different deal when they come into state government. But otherwise, the state's on hook for rather lavish pensions. And again, there's just not going to be the money to pay for it.
Yeah, those were fiscally irresponsible. And, there's a close political nexus between the Democratic Party and unions. And I mean, again, we just talked about perhaps $190,000 average compensation package for state workers. Retirement benefits are very, very significant, and those are just going to be going up. I believe I don't know, we have an enormous amount of unfunded pension liabilities. So no, there really aren't any good solutions for this, other than hey, you know what? Let's try to keep the Peter Thiels and the Elon Musks and the Larry Pages and the Sergey Brins of Google. Let's try to keep them in California and have them continue to create amazing new businesses. Those people have left, as far as I know. So yeah, we're really shooting ourselves in the foot here. This has been a depressing podcast.
It is depressing, Jonathan. Maybe I just need to curl up with a good book. Do you have any good books in mind, Jonathan?
Yeah, it's called Young Man in a Hurry by California Governor Gavin Newsom. It's a new memoir and autobiography to be released next week. It's available on Amazon, Barnes and Noble, wherever you buy books if you care to buy it. This seems like an attempt to push back on the perception, the memoir that is, that he comes from privilege, and to introduce himself to voters nationwide as he looks at the national stage, possibly for the presidency. Early reviews coincide with fawning coverage in the likes of the New Yorker and Vogue magazine. Focusing on a political memoir rather than a policy blueprint, does that risk handing opponents a ready-made opposition research in a presidential cycle? You might recall now DHS Secretary Kristi Noem and then Governor of North Dakota sabotaging her own vice presidential prospects by publishing her memoir, which was memorable because she revealed that she had shot an untrainable dog. Bill, any thoughts on this?
Yeah, I mean, the first rule in writing a memoir about yourself is don't have a nugget in there that's going to blow up in your face. So whoever's advising then Governor Nome should have said, Madam Governor, with all due respect, if you put it out there, you killed a dog, you got a problem. Remember when Mitt Romney ran for president? He told the story about strapping the dog to the roof of the car and how much grief he got for that. And Nome never recovered from that. Here she was trying to run for vice president at the time. She was, she was lobbying for the job. This book was a way to sell herself as a really cool person, and it just backfired. All of a sudden, she was in the middle of PETA and a million people coming after her. So Newsom and the question of memoir over policy. The book cuts off, by the way, when he becomes governor, so we don't get in the gubernatorial years. Maybe there'll be a follow-up book after he leaves office to talk about policy, but right now he's doing the personal side of things. I don't think it's a bad strategy myself. because, looks matter when it comes to Gavin Newsom. You read the little clip from Vogue. Embarrassingly handsome, his season, his hair seasoned with silver. Gavin Newsom looks like $1 million. He's worth many millions of dollars, and therein lies the challenge. People look at him. What they know about him is he made a killing in the wine and hospitality business, so they think he just, is just filthy rich and has always had it easy. He reeks of California privilege. So the book is a pushback against that. The challenge is going to be plain and simple if the book really kind of holds water. They have been very aggressive, giving it to friendly outlets. It's already been reviewed in the likes of the New York Times, the Washington Post, and so forth. And you mentioned New Yorker and Vogue. By the way, this ties in with them kind of raising the profile of the first partner, Jennifer Siebel Newsom, where you see flattering pieces written about her as well. So they really are kind of pushing with the cult of personality more than the policy here. And I suspect, Lee, that's for two simple reasons. Number one, there's this thing in presidential politics where we have to have pathos attached to our candidate. This was a lesson I learned when I worked on George H.W. Bush's campaign in 1992. We ran against Bill Clinton and Al Gore, and after their convention, they went around on media and talked about their difficult childhoods. And with Clinton, it was being raised by a very steely, steel magnolia in the South, and for Gore, it was having a father he could never please. And then we were on the Bush campaign, kind of laughing at this, thinking voters don't want to listen to this psychobabble. And we were wrong. Voters wanted to listen to the psychobabble. The world was changing, the Cold War was ending, and people wanted to feel the candidate's pain, as Bill Clinton famously said. Since then, candidates, both Republican and Democrat, have given us various tales of woe. George W. Bush, talked about kicking the bottle. Remember the supposed line of Laura Bush, "It's either me or the Jack Daniels." Barack Obama penned a memoir which talked about how difficult it was to be black and white and not really understanding his identity. Joe Biden talked about overcoming stuttering and dealing with the loss of his wife and a daughter. Interesting, the one person to break this trend was, of course, Donald Trump, who just went the other way, just kind of relished in the fact of how wealthy he was, how attractive his wife was. Don't feel sorry for me. Worship me. Look how great I am. But here's Newsom coming on and continue this pattern. In his case, what he wants you to know is that he grew up in Marin County. His boyhood was complicated because his parents had divorced. His mother was doing multiple jobs, yet his father was tied into the world of the Gettys. So he was what the phrase used in the movie The Departure. He was a double kid. He was living the good life in Pacific Heights in San Francisco, but also seeing his mother struggling in Marin County, at the same time dealing with his dyslexia, not knowing who he was and what it was all about. The question, Lee, is going to be if people start liking Gavin Newsom. And here is, I think, the problem which he has set for himself, the trap he's almost set for himself. He has been so busy on social media the past year now, flaming Donald Trump, making himself a very polarizing figure by doing so. I'm not sure how many people there are in between right now who have kind of an open mind about Gavin Newsom. In other words, I suspect they either like him very much or dislike him very much based on what he's been doing on the social media side. I'm just not sure how many persuadables are sitting out there, Lee.
Great. Yes, I think, yes, he is very polarizing. The last poll survey I saw about him was favorables, I think, were in the 30s somewhere. Now, Trump's favorables are also, low. I suspect J.D. Vance's favorables are low, so it's hard to know what to make about that. The challenge for any national candidate is that right now, nationally, Democrats are about 27% of voters, Republicans are about 27% of voters, and independents are 45% of voters. So Democratic candidate, certainly you plug them in against, when you plug them in against Trump, you're pretty much guaranteed the entire Democratic vote. But
Right.
but there's that big group in the middle that you have to grab. And that group in 2024 voted about policy issues. They voted about immigration, they voted about cost of living. They voted about economic opportunities. They voted about a President Biden who's very old, who no longer seemed competent. So right now, sitting in 2026, now this is what, at least 2.5 years away from the election in 2028. I mean, when I look at the list of candidates, which are Newsom, perhaps Harris, perhaps AOC, that Bill, you talked about her in Munich, and she didn't know where Venezuela was located on the map. Those, I think, are the three leading candidates right now. I mean, if the Republicans run someone who I think is not polarizing in terms of issues such as abortion, I just don't see how I don't see how the Democrats win. Now, maybe another candidate comes up like Andy Beshear, who is a Democrat, who's the governor of a red state in Kentucky, who's been reelected, so he can do both sides of the aisle. You know, very intelligent, very competent person. So I think it's I would say right now it's the Republicans to lose. You know, I saw a Wall Street Journal story earlier this week where if you fellas watch much sports, you'll know who Stephen A. Smith is. He's
Mhm.
an ESPN, I think ESPN sports
Yes.
analyst, and he says, "You know what? I think this group of candidates is sufficiently weak that I think maybe I'll run." And he's actually, it's interesting. He's an African American fellow who has called out Newsom for policy failures. And he said, "Hey, you're a good-looking guy. You can give a great soundbite, but look what's happening in California."
Exactly. So I've yet to read the book. I will confess that I've ordered it. I've got to write a couple reviews on it. I think there are two things I'm going to be looking at in particular when I read it. Number one is how he explains his brief college baseball career. I don't know if we talked about this on the podcast before, but Newsom went to Santa Clara College, and he went there in part on a partial baseball scholarship. The book, from what I've read so far, suggests that that's how he got into the college. But I believe it's far more complicated. I think Jerry Brown wrote a letter for him. His father had Newsom's father, William Newsom, had a friend on the board of the university. They pulled strings to get him in, so it wasn't just baseball. And he never played varsity baseball in college anyway, so I want to see how fast and loose he plays with that. And the other one is the Proposition 8 debate in California. If you remember, Newsom, just days in office, I think like 40 days in office, starts handing out marriage licenses in San Francisco to same-sex couples. That triggers Proposition 8 and the so-called definition of marriage, saying that marriage is only between a man and a woman. Becomes a very contentious struggle on the ballot in 2008, I believe. And what Newsom's going to do in the book is talk about kind of how heroic it was to be out there in the front of it. And he gets credit for starting it, but what he's going to overlook probably is this. If you talk to people who worked on the Prop 8 campaign, or worked against Prop 8, I should say, the no side of things, they were ahead in the polls. They were going to beat Prop 8 by about 10 points. And then the Prop 8 campaign ran an ad featuring Gavin Newsom. And it was Gavin Newsom, after the Supreme Court had said that the marriage licenses could go through, and he famously said, "It's coming whether you like it or not." And he was in kind of full obnoxious mode when he did it. They ran that ad statewide, and what had been a 10-point deficit for the campaign went to about a 10 to 15-point lead. It flipped because of that one ad. So it's kind of on him, that campaign, if you will. So, this is going to be part of parsing it. But, getting back to the idea of policy here, it's difficult for him to talk about California in terms of what he's done. Getting back to those talking points, what does he fall back on? Well, he plays fast and loose with the taxes, and then he quickly nestles himself in the fact we're the fourth largest economy, but he doesn't talk about things he has done while he's in office. Now, going back to my experience in 1992 with all of this, at one point the struggling Bush campaign decided to make it a referendum on Arkansas. And so we actually took reporters down to Arkansas, did a tour of the state, and wanted to point out how it was 47th in this and 48th in that. The problem, though, was that voters already had kind of a preconceived notion about Arkansas. It was not a very favorable one. But California, Lee and Jonathan, is a different animal. And the not so golden state of the Golden State is concerned nationally for people. It surprises them. I'm talking about homelessness and trash on the street and things like that. So again, Lee, he's got to shore up some of these things before he leaves office. And the clock is ticking. Every day that he goes over to Munich or goes to the World Economic Forum in Davos, that's one less day he could be in California attending to state business.
Well, Bill, I think it was I think perhaps 2021, maybe 2022, San Francisco Chronicle, which is, progressive paper,
Yeah.
ran an editorial saying, "Governor, you need to stay home and you need to do your day job." That was a long time ago. There's just so many, from an opposition research point of view, there's so many photo ops that are going to look bad for the governor.
Mm-hmm.
Palisades fire, in which state of California is now being sued. as well as the city of Los Angeles. There's a photo of the governor that I've seen many, many times. It shows him on Skid Row in LA, which is just horrendous. It is just absolutely
He's walking by the
awful.
guy. He's walking by the guy on the street, right? Yeah.
There's I believe an African American fellow who was literally laying on the street with his hand up.
Yep.
And it looks like the governor is, practically stepping over him,
He's a
wearing a beautiful suit, three,
he's a
four, $5,000
he's a
suit, and holding a lot.
he's a middle-aged man in a hurry.
Yeah, and he's wearing this beautiful suit, beautiful shoes, and he's holding a latte. And it's hard to imagine if you could stage a photo that would be more polarizing in terms of the elites and the haves versus those that life has left behind.
Well, I would start with homelessness if I'm gonna do just a photo campaign in California, run an ad on California. The governor's office put out a release in January touting about homelessness being down in 2025. What they neglected was that overall, under his watch, it's up about 14% statewide. So therein lies the problem. There's the visual. The second thing I might get into is probably a social issue, and that's the question of transgender and schools, and Newsom signing a bill in which schools don't have to report back to the parents if the kid decides to change his or her gender, if you will. That combined with Newsom just kind of not having an answer when it comes to transgender sports, I think it's just kind of something easy to hang around his neck. And then the third one coming his way might be the hot mess that is the Los Angeles Olympics. And maybe, Jonathan, this should be our segue to talking about the hot mess that is Los Angeles in general right
Yeah,
now.
yeah, it's a lot of turmoil in LA. Former school superintendent and deputy mayor Austin Buettner drops out of the mayoral race. Rick Caruso decides that he's not going to run, so that leaves among the leading contenders progressive council member Nithya Raman, who's a former ally of current mayor Karen Bass. Meanwhile, Mayor Bass has her own troubles. She's called on the 2028 Olympics chief Casey Wasserman to step down for his Epstein ties. Apparently, he was shown swapping emails with Ghislaine Maxwell. And there's also emails showing that Bass personally directed the city's damage control in the days after federal prosecutors announced that the Palisades fire was sparked by a small fire that hadn't been fully extinguished a week earlier. So, Lee, just to start off, is there a Peter Uberoth like figure who can restore confidence and discipline ahead of the 2028 Olympics, given the mounting costs and reliance on federal dollars should LA press forward and go full speed ahead for the games?
Yeah, well, so a very unfortunate story about Casey Wasserman. Newsom, the last I saw from Newsom was that he was going to talk to Wasserman following the story that broke about Epstein, and I don't know if there's been anything after that. LA Mayor Karen Bass has asked that he step down, which is really ironic, given that she presided over the total mess of the Palisades fire, that she was in Ghana when it broke out, that she's now, the city of LA is now being sued. The city of LA is now suing the state of California. The judge in those cases, I believe, has dismissed the argument of the attorneys for the city of LA and for the state of California of immunity. So California State and LA argued that they should be immune from these lawsuits. It now seems extremely obvious that LA was remarkably negligent in terms of the Palisades fire. So what this means legally is that discovery can now go forward, which means that all those text messages among firefighters and internal communications can now, will now come out in court. And Bass, I believe LA Times was suing to have Bass's text messages, which disappeared. When you look at LA and the Olympics, I mean, I just see a disaster. LA is a governance mess. Karen Bass, in my opinion, even just beyond the Palisades fire, has not been an effective mayor. To be mayor of LA, I mean, you got to have enormous CEO experience. You have to have enormous leadership experience. You're running a huge organization, and she had never done anything like that before. Now, Rick Caruso, who was their Democratic opponent the first time around, had that experience. So I think Caruso is a guy. If Wasserman does not do it, I think Caruso. I mean, he's very smart, very savvy. He gets things done, but I don't know if that certainly wouldn't be Karen Bass's choice. Might be Newsom's choice. He likes Caruso. But in '84, so I'm going to date myself here, but I was just out of college. I was living in LA. It was I think my first or second job. Ubroth was just remarkable. The city ran beautifully. There was less traffic because Ubroth figured out let's stagger business start times so we don't really clog up the freeways. It worked great. I think the city made money on that. But Bill, as we talked about before, this is what, $7 billion we're looking at, and there's a
Seven billion and growing, Lee, and they're going to need about another 2 billion from Washington. So they're going to have to find somebody who can work DC. Kevin McCarthy's name has been floated, presumably somebody who could get Republicans to cough up money. Mr. Caruso might have to go scrub his social media because he's not been very polite toward Donald Trump the past year or so. There's just no obvious candidate. But I'd like to move back to the mayor's race for a second because I find this fascinating, Lee and Jonathan, in this regard. We have talked in the past about a Caruso-Bass race, and it would have been, Caruso running from the center against Bass and being kind of the common sense guy and just, I'm going to bring corporate sensibility to the job. Enough is enough. But now he's out, and in is Nidia Raman. I guess we should also mention Spencer Pratt, Lee's good friend from reality TV, is also running for mayor. But Nidia Raman changes this race in a couple of regards. First of all, she makes it a generational race because Karen Bass is, I think, 72 years old, and I think Ms. Raman is 44 years old. But now we have left versus even further left instead of left versus center because Nidia Raman is a Democratic socialist. And so that means you're going to have two people arguing over the left side of the spectrum. So, Lee, the question is, if you're a Latino voter in Los Angeles, and I think Latinos are the majority of the electorate there, or the plurality, I should say, if you are a moderate, if you're, say, a tough on crime person who voted for Hawkman in the last DA's race in Los Angeles, who are you going to vote for when the choice is kind of that night and later that night in terms of left versus far left?
Yeah, you look at that race and you ask yourself, who's going to run this city? Yeah, Rothman, as you mentioned, Democratic Socialists of America. I think there are 3 or 4 on the city council who are members of DSA, something like that. So I mean, just LA governance is just awful, both at the city level and then also at the county level. So we've got Spencer Pratt, who nobody's going to hear of outside of west of the 405, where he's very, very popular because a lot of very wealthy people, including very wealthy, very democratic people, I mean, they live in the Palisades, they live in Malibu, they live in Brentwood. It's just a mess there. So, Bill, I don't know. I suspect Caruso. What did Caruso do? He kind of did a 48 to 72 hour kind of reconsideration of whether he was going to run, and then he decided not to. I don't know what was up with that. Maybe, I mean, it's an awful job right now.
Well, but she did something. Nidia Raman did something similarly. She had endorsed Bass in this race, and then
Yeah,
she
that's
put back
right.
the endorsement and decided, why not me? I suspect her people went to her and said, there's a void here. You can fill it. You can take her down. But, it's a far different race with her in and him out. For example, Lee, no one's going to talk about the $1 million outhouse that sits atop Runyon Canyon. I mean, only in Los Angeles, Lee, can you build $1 million 2-toilet facility.
No, yeah. You see stuff like that. There's so at a hiking trail in the Hollywood Hills, there is, well, they're probably gender neutral, but there are 2 bathrooms and it costs $1 million. You
I
can
mean,
buy.
two stalls, Lee, $1 million.
No, I know. As you guys know, I've railed about the $1 million per unit apartment buildings for the homeless in California, and now we're down to 1 million, a couple of bathrooms. Well, I mean, not even, not bathrooms, is toilet and a basin. So it's like, where's the accountability, the fiscal responsibility? That just simply is, I mean, it's silly. Another one of these things that happened, Bill, was Well, let me begin by saying that in LA now, there's this issue called shade equity. So
Yes.
the idea being that, the Palisades and Brentwood, Westwood, they're full of trees. You go out to East LA, not as many trees. So shade equity means that, you go to a bus stop and you build some shade. So there's a spot, I think it's in the San Fernando Valley, where they built some shade by putting in a few poles. And then there's a fabric you can stretch across these poles, that kind of a mesh fabric that basically blocks the sun. I looked at that. So if you can picture that, and if you Google it, you can find it. But if you can picture, like, a few poles and then some fabric stretched across those poles to provide some shade, that was $350,000. I can buy a really nice house, single family home in a lot of the country for $350,000. So there's just kind of just an awful sense of governance, which in LA, I mean, where else could you imagine choosing to build a bike lane that's going to be 8 miles long and spend $1 billion on an 8 mile bike lane? LA is doing that. There's just no rhyme or reason for how this is going. So yeah, Karen Bass, Rothman, Spencer Pratt, of course, has no political background, and nobody east of 405 is going to have heard of him. Right now, I think Bass has all the support of the unions, and I think there might be 900,000 union members in California, and I think nearly all of them are in state and local government. But they are all behind Bass. I guess that could change. But with all the union backing, I guess I see Bass winning.
Well, we'll see. I mean, let's say it gets in a runoff between Rahman and Bass, so the top two vote getters. They move on to November. I could see Rahman kind of going easy on the democratic socialist stuff and be a lot more friendly toward law enforcement, for example. But then it's the same with Zohran Mamdani in New York City. Once you're actually given the keys to the city, how do you govern? And one thing I'm looking at here is taxes, for example. There's a proposed half-cent sales tax for healthcare services on the June ballot. I mean, you got to wonder where else would she or Bass go with taxes, because that city and that county's appetite for taxes, Lee, just seems insatiable. If they're not getting you on your income tax or your sales tax, they're going after your mention tax. They just keep coming up with new ways to pick your pocket.
Yeah, there's this. Yes, there would be a 0.5% increase in the sales tax. That could bring taxes in some very poor communities up to about, I think, 11 or possibly 11.25%, among the highest in the country. And the LA County sales tax, I think it just went up a year or two ago. So you just can't keep doing this to people. You got to, you got to, if you're going to govern, you got to spend money efficiently and effectively, and you can't be writing checks. You can't be writing $1 million checks for 2 bathroom stalls or $350,000 for shade equity. It just boggles the mind here. I mean, I don't know what else to say. I can't. I've spoken to developers about this stuff, and they just scratch their heads and they just say this is insane. And every one of them says, I bet there's people in there who are benefiting. And of course, fraud is now the new catchword across the country. And we'll see how much fraud is uncovered within California. But I know that some affordable housing projects have been found to have enormous fraud, and some of the developers have been indicted.
Well, maybe if she's elected, Mayor Rahman will choose Billie Eilish as their housing czar. Billie Eilish, the Grammy winner, who seems to think that we all live on stolen land. So maybe we'll just get into returning stolen land to Los Angeles to the natives.
Well, thank you, gentlemen. As always, this has been a very interesting hour of policy analysis. Thank you both for your time, and see you next month.
Okay, take care, guys.
Always fun. Thanks, fellas.
You've been listening to Matters of Policy and Politics, a podcast of the Hoover Institution. Don't forget to subscribe to this podcast wherever you might hear it. Also get alerted to new episodes of the show and the latest articles of California on your mind from Bill and Lee by signing up for the Hoover Daily Report at hoover.org/HDR. That's hoover.org/HDR. I'm Jonathan LaVorta, sitting in for Bill Whalen, who will be back for another episode of Matters of Policy and Politics next week. Thank you for listening.
This podcast is a production of the Hoover Institution. where we generate and promote ideas advancing freedom. For more information about our work, to hear more of our podcasts, or view our video content, please visit hoover.org.